Welcome back. I'm Yossi Goslin, NBA salary cap analyst, and I'm going to talk about the Zach LaVine to Denver rumors that came up last night. I want to talk about a couple of iterations of how the trade could go down, and also look ahead to see how that would, what kind of implications that would have to the Nuggets payroll in the future. So I'll get into it. Before I start, please subscribe if you haven't already, and please check out my Substack, The Third Apron, where I get into even more deeper salary cap analysis. So let's take a quick look at the Nuggets roster right now. They have a full 15-man roster, and they are in between both apron levels. They're above the first apron and below the second apron. So because they're below the second apron, they can aggregate salaries. They can put together multiple players and to acquire a more expensive one. However, since they're above the first apron, they cannot increase their payroll in the trade. So they have to send out more salaries than whatever LaVine's incoming number is. So Nuggets had a pretty rough offseason, mainly that they lost Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and if they were to resign him, match whatever Orlando gave him, they would be very deep into the tax and way, way above the second apron level. And if that happened, then they wouldn't be able to acquire Zach LaVine right now without trading Nikola Jokic, just by the rules of what you can do as a second apron team. So if this is the type of trade they want to do, acquire a player like Zach LaVine, then I suppose the silver lining of not bringing back Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is that now it's possible to get him by trading other players. And I almost forgot to note that the Zach LaVine interest from Denver was first reported by The Athletic, and they even went ahead and reported this framework as a possibility. You've got Michael Porter Jr., Zeke Naji, both together make slightly more than Zach LaVine's salary. So on the surface, this deal works. And one other thing to keep in mind is that the Nuggets, they can't trade any first round picks. Not that they would need to, in my opinion. So this would most likely be a player base swap, but I just wanted to note that. So here's the Nuggets payroll. I put in Zach LaVine for Michael Porter Jr. and Zeke Naji. And as you can see, it's a pretty clean swap. Payroll stays mostly the same, and they still have enough space below the second apron to not only add a 15th player, but maybe even dip into a trade exception they have. They have a $5.25 million trade exception if they want to bring in another guy. I will also note that SNYZ and Bailey reported that the Nuggets also have some interest in Brandon Ingram. And he's injured at the moment, so I think that doesn't make quite as much sense. I also don't think he's quite as good a fit for the Nuggets as Zach LaVine would be. But just want to put that out there that this framework I put out for the same framework that's being put out for Zach LaVine would work for Ingram. And since he earns less than LaVine, then they can even do Michael Porter Jr. and someone like Dario Saric, who earns less and has less years left on his deal than Zeke Naji, in case the Pelicans didn't want him. Now I'm going to throw out one more framework because there's one other detail I haven't seen discussed that much or even at all about Zach LaVine in a potential trade, and that is that he has a trade bonus. So if he were traded today, it would increase his salary both this year and next year by $5 million each. So instead of making $43 million, if traded today, it would increase to $48.7 million. So if that's the case, the Nuggets now need to send out more salaries in addition to Michael Porter Jr. and Zeke Naji. So I plugged in Dario Saric, who I'm sure the Nuggets have no problem moving at this point. He's not in the rotation anymore. And it works. All three players combine, all make a little more than Zach LaVine's salary. However, this might be a big ask for the Bulls because now they're asking them to take on another unwanted salary, another player that's not expiring. Not sure if he even fits in the Bulls' plans. So the Nuggets might have a hard time getting this done just because they don't even have any second round picks to trade. So they don't have any picks to trade whatsoever. So it might be a little tricky to get this aspect done. But either way, the Nuggets wouldn't have any problem fitting in Zach LaVine's trade bonus. So if he's traded on trade deadline day, this is what his salary would be, that $47.7 million amount for this season. So I plugged that in. I took out those three players I have outgoing, and same general payroll structure. They are well below the second apron, so they can still fill out their last 2 roster spots if they want to go ahead and be aggressive, try to get someone with that trade exception, and maybe they can even expand the trade with the Bulls. They could still take on a minimum salary player like Torrey Craig, maybe bring back an old familiar face there. But now the next thing I want to do is look ahead and see just how viable keeping Zach LaVine is beyond this season, seeing if this trade ultimately makes sense. And just when looking at next year, they could still keep their payroll at the level that they'd ideally like. So let's say Zach LaVine does get traded to the Nuggets at this year's trade deadline. He gets his full trade bonus, which would increase his salary next year up to $15.7 million. So now the Nuggets have 3 max players. So in this case, when looking at the rest of the roster they already have, they could still get to the 14-player minimum requirement with minimum signings, so just 3 more minimum signings, and they would be able to stay just below the second apron. So it all works. They can now, along with not bringing back Kentavious Caldwell-Pope on what would have been a multi-year deal, this also wouldn't be a possibility if Aaron Gordon didn't opt in to his $22.8 million player option as part of the extension he did. Because if he declined it and took the max extension that he was able to get, it would start him at $32 million. So now they have even more flexibility next year to be aggressive and make this type of trade for a guy like Zach LaVine. However, things get much more complicated beyond the 25-26 season once Aaron Gordon's extension does kick in, and also Christian Brown and Peyton Watson are going to be due for new deals. They'll be extension eligible next summer. Otherwise, they'll be restricted free agents in 2026. So all that, the possibility of whatever those players end up getting on their next deals, combined with having 3 max players in 26-27, is going to push them way deep into the tax, should push them well over the second apron, and could force them to make some tough decisions. Now, because of all this in mind, I think I'd rather keep Michael Porter Jr. He's having the best season of his career so far. He's an elite enough shooter, and he's younger than Zach LaVine. Not by too much, I believe, 3 years. LaVine, he's better on the ball. He's better as a creator. And he's also having by far his best shooting season. He's outpacing Michael Porter Jr. so far. But both players are pretty injury prone. However, you could argue that given Michael Porter Jr.'s injury history, there might be more of a case for him to break down earlier. But the other thing with Michael Porter Jr. is that he has disappointed in the playoffs in the past. So there is that element. If you're the Nuggets, maybe you want to prevent that. But when he is executing his role, it's far less demanding, and the Nuggets don't need that much more from him when he's hitting his shots and getting to the spots he needs to be. So with all that said, I think I'd rather, if I'm the Nuggets, keep Michael Porter Jr. at he's making $35 million, then get Zach LaVine making $45 million plus. And Michael Porter Jr. deal is almost done. He's got 1 more year left, so he will be extension eligible next year. Maybe the Nuggets can bring him back at a similar salary range or even less. So just knowing that he's going to be cheaper, I think that makes the Nuggets payroll issues in the future far less complicated. So overall, I think I like it a little more for the Bulls. They wouldn't get any draft picks if it's a 2-team deal since the Nuggets can't trade any, and they wouldn't get any immediate salary relief in either of the frameworks I proposed, but it would come eventually once they extend Michael Porter Jr., assuming he gets, assuming he'll be a little cheaper than LaVine. But they get a little younger, they get a little more flexibility eventually, and I think they balance out the roster a little better. They've had so many guards over the years, so many undersized players, and they've needed some size at the wing, and a guy like Michael Porter Jr. fits that.